There's a great article in the Washington Spectator by David Akajian eviscerating the notion that we have liberal media. So I want to run through some of this for you. The idea is that if we had a liberal media, they certainly would cover these things much, much more. So first of all, outsourcing. Quote, since 2000, U.S. multinationals have cut 2.9 million jobs here while increasing employment overseas by 2.4 million. This is likely just the tip of the iceberg, as multinational corporations account for only about 20% of the labor force. Now, of course, when you dive into the details, you find that there's NAFTA, there's CAFTA, there's GATT, there's the WTO, there's permanent normal trade relations with China. And when you take into account all these different so-called free trade deals, the net result is good-paying middle-class jobs in America being shipped everywhere but America. So if you had a liberal media, if you really did, they'd be talking about this. I can't tell you the last time I've seen, an in-depth report on outsourcing on any of the mainstream networks. Even on MSNBC, the last person who would talk about it was Ed Schultz when he would discuss the TPP, and notice he's not at the network anymore. So they just don't talk about it all that much, and there's a reason why, because they're actually not a liberal media, and I'll get to what the real biases are in a little bit. So the second thing he says, income inequality. Yeah, I mean, sure, you hear a lot of talk about it here. You hear talk about it online and in new media outlets and in some print publications as well. But is the mainstream media on TV discussing income inequality? Maybe just a little itty bit, but not even really that much. Quote, in 2010, the top 1% alone held 35% of all net worth. So 1% has 35% of net worth in 2010 alone. The bottom 80% of people held only 12% of net worth in the year 2010. They say in 1983, the bottom 80% held 18% of net worth. So look at that, man. Even from 1983 until today, there's been a giant chunk taken out of what the bottom 80% get, and where has it gone? To the top 1%. And then, when you look at the global picture, it's even crazier. The Oxfam report that came out about a year ago, which found that the world's richest 80 people, that's it, just the richest 80 people, as they say in the original article, you could fit them on a double-decker bus. So the richest 80 people in the world, they have more wealth than the bottom 3.5 billion. That's incredible. 80 people more than 3.5 billion. That's 80 people with more wealth than 50% of the world. Okay. Even if you're a conservative, you got to look at that and go, yeah, something's off there. And again, this is something that is the mainstream media talking about this, harping away on this, making this a central issue. No, you're more likely to hear a story about the Kardashians than you are to hear about this. And you know that's true. All right, the third thing, ALEC. We don't hear much about ALEC. Now, every now and then something slips through the cracks. There was a story, it was a local news report that I saw maybe about 3 months ago where a guy covered ALEC in pretty good detail. But it's largely absent from the national conversation in terms of on TV and the mainstream media. So, of course, that stands for the American Legislative Exchange Council. And he says, quote, if there were a corporate organization that drafted laws and then passed them on to state legislators to implement, you would think the liberal media would report on them. That's right. And they don't talk about it nearly as much as they should. And we know that they've also pushed for these so-called right-to-work laws, which in reality are right to work for less, which, swing a bat at the union's kneecaps. We know that they preemptively pass vacation day bans, where they try to say, like, no, even if you in the future want to say, let's do maternity leave or paternity leave or more paid vacation days, they kneecap it at the state level. These are the kinds of things they push for. And remember, the lobbyists just hand the legislation directly to the legislators. They change like 2 words in there, and then they propose it. Unbelievable corruption. In-your-face corruption. Not discussed nearly as much as it should. So-called liberal media here at work. The incarceration crisis. Number 4. Do they talk about this as much as they should? Quote, the U.S. has the most people in prison by far of any other country in the world. With 5% of the world's population, we have 25% of the world's prisoners. That's 2.3 million criminals. China, with a population 4 times ours, is second with 1.6 million people in prison. Guys, we have more people in prison in the U.S. today than Stalin did in his gulags at their height when they were the most populated they ever were. This is unbelievable, and of course, disproportionately, these are black people or Hispanic people, these are minority communities. And the war on drugs has given a green light to oppress these communities. That's why people call this the new Jim Crow. So this is an amazing problem, and it's not spoken about nearly enough. These are real issues here. This is not a liberal media. They're not talking about these things in detail and often. How about healthcare costs? Quote, the expenditure per person in the U.S. is $8,233. Norway is second with $5,388. And our outcomes are worse than Norway. We spend way more per person for healthcare, per capita for healthcare, and they're owning us and they spend less. And they're number 2. They say the total amount of GDP spent on healthcare is also the highest of any country in the world at 17.6%. The next closest country is the Netherlands at 12%. And our money's not even really going to care. Our money is going to people in a for-profit system where there are leeches who are the middlemen, who are sucking us dry. Okay, where's the liberal media? Where are you? You're not talking about this enough. All right, and finally, I'll just give you 2 more here. But he goes on. He gives, I think, 13 examples. Glass-Steagall, he says, if there's a so-called liberal media, why are you not talking about Glass-Steagall? It separated commercial banking from investment banking and led to a steady banking system for decades. And then when we got rid of it, which happened under Clinton, what happened? Not too long after that, we had the subprime mortgage crisis and the Great Recession, and you allowed commercial banks to take crazy casino capitalist bets that are obviously going to blow up in their face. So, but they don't talk about it. Go look and see how often they mention Glass-Steagall in the mainstream media. You're not going to see much of it. Gerrymandering is another one. They don't bring that up nearly as much. And of course, this is killing the Democrats. I mean, here are the real biases of the mainstream media. It's not a liberal media bias. If you believe that, you're just brainwashed by the dumbass Republicans who just repeat it over and over, and they assert it as if that then therefore means that it's true. No, you just asserted it. You didn't provide any evidence to back it up. You just say it. It's a fucking tick that you have in your brain. It's a virus. Liberal media, liberal media. But that's not true. It's not real. You don't actually provide evidence for it. So here are the real biases. By and large, and it depends which outlet you're talking about. Obviously, MSNBC is biased to the Democratic Party, not a liberal bias, not a progressive bias, but a Democratic Party bias. Fox News is biased towards the Republican establishment. But by and large, you have, whether it's CNN or the nightly news, you have a bias towards, number 1, the establishment. So you don't go further to the left on the spectrum than what the Democratic Party allows you to do. So there is no real progressive voice. There is no real liberal voice. It's just a bias towards the establishment, what the 2 parties say. You report what they say and nothing else. A bias towards sensationalism, which is why you sprinkle in stories about reality TV stars and whatnot in the middle of actual news, and a bias towards neutrality, which means, again, the Republicans say X, the Democrats say Y, you guys decide which one is correct, let's move on to the next story. So no onus on facts or history or reality or putting things in context and having perspective and nuance and detail. Just here's what the establishment says. Let's go. Let's move along here. So those are the 3 real biases in the media. If it was a liberally biased media, you would hear about all the things I just laid out for you. And also, let me say this, to further increase my vulnerability. I wish that was the case, because as Stephen Colbert said, reality has a well-known liberal bias. You know, if you look at the civil rights movement, I don't think it's just a matter of opinion that MLK was right and the racist Alabama sheriffs were wrong. Bull Connor was wrong. No, I think that's just true. I don't think it's liberally biased to say, oh, that guy's the good guy and that guy's the bad guy. By the same token, to point out these policy issues, Glass-Steagall, income inequality and how to fix that, I think that's just true. You can categorize it as liberal, but it also happens to be true. So I wish the media was like that, but clearly it's not.